Hello and welcome to the Canadian National Railway Wholesale Sanmore Subdivision.
Greetings everyone and welcome to episode number 8. This is July 2020 and I have a slightly different episode for you guys in store today. This will be a how-to episode. Usually I keep the how-to for articles, but this time I figured this type of how-to is probably better justified with the video. Because of the content. It's not something that shows pretty good on photos. So today I'll be showing you how I made my photo backdrops using a tool that I slightly modified. Let's get to it. Okay, before I get started, just want to give you a brief history on what I've done towards the research in creating my backdrops. The first thing I did was look into commercially available backdrops. Those are great. The only thing is, for my personal preference, for what I wanted to recreate here, there was nothing I could find that was commercially available that would look like the Canadian North Shore, especially in the season that I'm modeling, which is early spring. So I decided to take my own photos and try to get those printed. I did check with a couple of commercial print shops to have these printed on adhesive vinyl. The one thing that came out of this is that the adhesive vinyl, even if it's considered to be a flat or a matte surface, there's still a little bit of a glare to it, kind of like my forehead right now. And it doesn't look as good when you can see the glare of the lights in your backdrops. And the other thing is the adhesive vinyl, as good as it is, once it's applied to, let's say, a vehicle or a sign or something that's been prepared for it, on my backdrops, on the paint, even if the paint is close to 5 years old now, I know it's dry, but for some reason the vinyl did not adhere well. I'll just switch the camera around and I'll show you what I mean here. Okay, sorry about that. Looks like I was not able to switch the camera from the front facing camera to the rear facing camera. So here we go. This is what the adhesive vinyl, that was the result. And I don't know, there, as you can see there's a little bit of a glare to it. Doesn't show as much because I have a few lights that are off here. But the main thing is that stuff doesn't stay in place. Doesn't stick too well. The other thing is, for the entire basement here, I had a price made, and the best price that I got from one print shop was $3,600 plus tax. So that makes for an expensive backdrop. So I decided to maybe try to print my own photos on regular paper and find a way to glue the photos to the wall. And this is my very first original test here, which is one of my photos printed on paper. You can even see the Scotch tape here. I wasn't too careful here because all this area here will be covered anyway. So yeah, but still, you can see the photo, and it's matte. It's a matte surface, and it's you can't feel where the paper ends and where the paint starts. That's because of the method that I use to apply the paper, which I'll be showing you in a few minutes. But for now, I just wanted to show you the difference between what I could have had with the vinyl and what I've been able to create. Now the color is not quite right here. It's a little bit dark. That's something that you can adjust with your printer. So there you go. We'll go upstairs to the workshop and I'll describe how I did this. Okay, now like I said, the first step in in building my backdrops, well, I mean the second step actually, because the first step would have been to build the backdrops and paint the blue sky. The second step was to do some research as far as finding the right scenery that I wanted to photograph. And fortunately, I mean, up here on the North Shore, there's a lot of nature all around me. So I just took off one day with a sandwich and I used my phone, same phone that I'm using for making these videos. And I took a bunch of photos, and then I downloaded these photos into my computer, and I placed the photos in what looked like a good order. It doesn't need to be perfect because oftentimes there will be either a building or a peak of a mountain or something that will separate the scenes a little bit. But I wanted at least a 30-40 foot length that would be in the same theme, and then I would move on to something else. And what I did, I have a printer here that prints ledger size paper, which is 11 by 17 inches. So I use my printer, and I just cropped off I use Corel Draw. In Corel Draw, I just cropped the blue sky because I didn't need to print that part. So it's needless to spend all that ink, especially if you have several hundreds of sheets to print. So I just cropped it off, and I scaled approximately what I thought would look nice. And I printed the sheets, and I just numbered the sheets so that I have the right order. I numbered the back of the sheets so I have the right order once they're all printed. And then I proceeded to cutting all the sky out of the way, because if I was to just if I was to use that crop line and just cut the white part out and put that on my blue backdrop, the problem with that is that ink and paint don't use the same type of pigments, and it's very, very hard to match. So unless you print a whiter blue band here, and then you add some clouds and you stick that to your blue wall, and if the blue doesn't quite match, then you have the clouds in between, but that's not something I wanted to do. I've seen a lot of photo backdrops, and the modelers try to trim as best as they can around the trees, but that can be hard. I mean, if you look at this closely, there's a lot of details in there, little branches and all the tops of the trees, and that can be quite challenging if you're trying to trim the blue sky out of the way there. And the first method I tried was with an X-Acto knife, and trying to cut as close as possible, but then again, it still looks like a knife cut because it's straight most of the time. And that's when I discovered that, well, let me go back here a little bit. When thinking about how I could do this, I was thinking that if I could use my laser engraver to cut the paper, it would be excellent, because the laser will go anywhere that I tell it to, I set it up to. The thing is, I would have to do an entire setup for each and every sheet. So I would need to scan each sheet and set up a cut line that the laser engraver would follow to cut all around the branches. Now that's a lot of work. And that's when I started looking around at other laser engravers, because my laser engraver is a CO2 laser engraver. It's more of a commercial machine. But nowadays, you have the diode laser engravers, which are really not expensive. They're not as powerful as the CO2 engravers, but for paper they work fine. And I looked online, I looked on Amazon, and I looked on eBay, and I noticed that you can buy these as kits. So I found just the laser head and the power supply. I didn't buy the entire thing. For I believe I paid $63 for the laser head and the power supply. And I'll show you what these are. One kit, I had this little power supply here. It's a 12 volt power supply. And this is the laser head. Now, don't mind the stick here, that's not part of it, and the masking tape, but this is the laser head. What it is, it's just a very powerful diode, and you have a little focus lens here that you can use. And once you set up that focus, it's just like using a magnifying glass with the sun when you're outside. You set your focus, and at a certain point you can burn stuff, which is a lot of what I did when I was a kid. But anyways, this works the same way, in the sense that you have that powerful diode in there, and you have that little focus lens, and you can set up the length. There's a length in a range in which this will work, and once you have that set up, you just adjust the focus until you get that tiny little dot that'll burn through paper. So what I did is I used a little stick here so that I would always have the same length here, the same distance from my paper. And I taped it to my laser head. Set that up on paper, set my lens, and boom, I have a freehand laser engraver, which I can use to go wherever I want, just like a knife, except that it's so much easier, so much simpler. It anywhere you go with this on paper, it'll just cut it. And I'll show you how this works, how well and how simple this works. Hold on. Okay, I tried to bring you a little bit closer here so you can see. I might have to readjust the camera, but for the moment, just want to see how this is set up. First thing I do is I work on a scrap piece of masonite, because since it'll burn right through the paper, it'll score whatever you're working on. So I'm using this little piece of masonite here. And a few words of caution when working with these. Even if it's just a diode, it's extremely powerful and it can be harmful for your eyes. So I'm wearing sunglasses here. So I'll take my glasses off, put my sunglasses on. The other thing you have to be careful when you're working with it is try not to run your fingers underneath here. Not that it'll cut you. It's not powerful. Well, this is a 500 milliwatts, so it's a 0.5 watts. It's not very powerful. But if your finger stays there for a few seconds, it'll burn. So yeah, you got to be careful. So I'll just plug this in here. The power supply is plugged in the wall. Just plug this in, and you can probably see the little dot there on the wall. Now, as you can see, because it's out of focus, it's not burning. It's out of focus, it's not powerful enough to burn. But once you reach this length right here, like so, now you probably can see a little bit of smoke coming out. It probably looks, if I'm looking at the camera right now, it looks like there's a big old flame there. There's there's no flame at all. There's just a blue dot, which probably the camera makes it look weird, but it's just a blue dot here. Now, wherever I'm going on my piece of paper here, I'll just do a demonstration. You can't work very fast with this, but then again, it's okay. I mean, if you have to go around all the branches and everything on your backdrop, on your trees there, it's probably best that you don't go fast. But you know, just going around here like this, and there you go. Cut right through. So I'll set the camera a bit closer, and I'll try to show you how this thing works on paper. Okay, this is as close as I can get. I hope that you'll be able to see what I'm doing here. So basically what I'm doing is I'm using the little stick as just like a pencil to hold my unit, and then I'm just working my way around slowly around all the branches. Now, I know you're going to say, well, this will take forever, and I have to agree. I mean, it's not something that's quick, but it's incredibly easy. I mean, if you compare this to trying to do the same job with an X-Acto knife, I mean, this is super simple. It's fun. Usually I'll just put some music on and, you know, not even think about it. I just follow along the treetops here, and you know, it just happens, just like magic. So I'll do just a little bit here, and I'll show you how this thing worked, how well it cut. Now, a word on when you're cutting, if you plan to use this part of the backdrop here directly on the blue backdrop, then it doesn't really matter if there's a little bit of blue between the branches. But if you're planning to layer a couple of these backdrops, one on top of the other to create distance, then it's best to make sure that you remove all the blue sky out of the branches, because then it looks kind of odd, because you have blue sky between your branches on a tree that's in front of a dark mountain. So that looks kind of weird. I've had to redo a few of my backdrops because of that. Okay, I'll just quit right here, unplug this thing, and show you. I don't know if that will work in focus. There you go. This is how well this worked. I'll show you better. I'll take a sheet that I cut and I'll show you better. Okay, so here's a sheet that I've pre-cut, just to show you how you can see the size of my fingers here, and I have very small hands, so you can just imagine the size of these details, these little branches, and how well this thing worked. Now you see the blue sky between the branches here. This is what I mentioned. If this is going on a blue backdrop, it's okay. I mean, it's not going to show. It's part of it. But if I'm layering, let's say I'd be layering these two backdrops here, then that kind of looks odd because you have some blue spots there where it's not supposed to be. So this is where you have to be careful if you're using layers. All right, so now let's move on to the application of these wonderful backdrops. Okay, now when it comes to actually applying the backdrops to the wall, first thing I did was kind of figure out exactly what I wanted. I mean, as far as scenery goes and everything else, I mean, there's no use in putting a backdrop, spending all that time putting a backdrop if you're going to hide it with a mountain or a series of buildings. So looking at the backdrop behind me here, you have the tunnel. That means that I need to have a mountain on that side that will slope to some kind of a valley. Right here, there's going to be a small creek where there will be an abandoned water dam. So that means that my backdrop needs to have some type of river, a little creek in it. And for the rest of this area right here, this is going into the mill in Tegenish. So this is the yard for the wood for the mill. So this needs to be flat land, at least where the mill is located. Behind that, there will be trees and trees and trees and more trees, and distant mountains behind those trees. So that means I'll have to layer a couple of different set of photos. I took photos of distant mountains, which I'll be applying first, and then I'll be applying the photos of the closer trees area, the wooded area. But before I do that, I'll go ahead and paint the clouds. Now, as you can see, I've started. I wanted to test what I was going to talk about. That makes more sense. What I'm doing for clouds is very simple. Let me just get that here. Spray paint, very cheap spray paint, flat white. And again, using my newly found freehand laser tool, I've made some cloud floating masks that I call them, which I just place in front of the backdrop. I'll try to show you here. Just place this in front of the backdrop. And put a little bit of paint. And there you have a few clouds. Let me get out of the way there. So what I'll do right now is I'll paint the clouds, then I'll be back with the backdrops. See you in a few minutes. All right, now this only took a few minutes and I got all my clouds painted with the spray can that goes quite fast. Amazing how you can go from a sunny day to a cloudy day. But there you go. Those are just a few of the clouds I painted on the backdrop. And what I did is I laid the prints on the floor. You can see the distant mountains and then the foreground trees. Now this is what I want to apply to the wall here. And I set this up on the floor because, as you can see, the distant mountains will be set a little bit higher than the foreground trees. And I wanted to measure that out so that, I don't end up covering all my distant mountains with the foreground trees. So I measured that out, and that comes out to about maybe 5 inches or so. So I made a line on my backdrop here at 5 inches. So now I will be gluing these papers to the wall. Now what I'm using to glue the papers is something very popular, which is called Mod Podge, and I'm using the flat version, matte. So using a roll, just like paint, I'll be applying the glue to the wall, and then I'll be applying my prints over it. So I'll set up the camera again, and I'll show you how I'm doing this. Okay, so now I'm ready to apply the paper. So just to show you what I'm doing, I put a little bit of Mod Podge in my pan, and I'm just rolling off Mod Podge here and applying this to my paper backdrop. Now you don't need a whole lot, because if you put too much, it'll just ooze out of the backdrop once you press it in place. Now I'll go put this in place there, and I'll set the camera up again. Okay, I just placed the sheet of paper onto the backdrop here, and what I'm doing right now is I'm just using this rubber roller, and I'm going over my print so that there's no air bubbles. This is why I was telling you, if you put too much Mod Podge, it'll just ooze out of there and it'll create a mess. So you just need enough for it to hold your paper in place for the moment. Just like this. All right. And I'll continue with the backdrop. I think I'll let the camera roll so that you can see what I'm doing. Okay, if you look behind me now, you can see that the first layer is now in place. It's set up just slightly above the edge of the painted backdrop, and for the moment I'll stop for now, because for two reasons. First of all, I need to let this dry, because if I don't let this dry and I try to apply the second layer on top of that, it's probably going to all shrivel up. And second reason, my phone battery is almost dead. Okay, now I am back, and this is 24 hours later. You can probably tell because I've had my beauty sleep, got a different shirt on, my hair grew a bit longer. No, not really. You can tell by the way the backdrop has dried up. So right now, this is all dried. This is all dried and ready. And I am ready to install the second layer, which will be set up just slightly below the first layer. And once that is done, this morning I cut just some random trees, because I figured I might need to hide a few joints here and there, because there's a couple of joints in my backdrop that I'm not liking. So probably once this is set up in front of it, if it doesn't hide it, I'll just add them trees right here. So I'm all set up. I'll get this done, and I'll show you the results once this is all completed. All right, so here is what the second layer looks like. So as you can see, this did bring out a lot of depth into the backdrop, as it sort of pushes the back mountains even further back. Now I've gone ahead and installed the backdrop all the way up to the mill, there's a little gap there. That's because there's going to be a building, so there was no use in putting backdrop there. And as you can see here, this is where I started with my backdrop a few minutes ago, and I reversed the order in which the photos were supposed to be. So here I will have a little bit of splicing to do, just to hide the fact that the photos don't exactly match. But this is going to be a scene with a distant mill and a wood yard, so it's probably not going to look too bad there. I'll try to hide the joints here and there, and it's probably going to look okay. And another area right here. Here you have 4 prints that meet each other. So this area looks a little bit weird. And this is a good example of where I'll be putting a foreground tree in front of this joint here. So I'll start with this one, and I'll leave the camera right here so I can show you exactly from one step to the other. Okay, I hope I placed the camera at the right spot there. Now you can see I've just applied the foreground trees, and where all 4 prints meet, can't really tell anymore. That sort of pushes the background even further away. And I've done the same right here, where there was another joint here that I didn't really like. And I've also started another layer here. This area will be between 2 buildings. So where the wood piles end, where the wood piles start and where the wood piles end at either side, there will be buildings. But between the buildings, if I focus here, this is what you'll see between the buildings. Now you can see once you add another layer of photos, and then you start adding the foreground items, it really starts to look like it's blending in. It's starting to push everything back, and that's where you realize that the backdrop just becomes a part of the scene. So it's not really that critical. Now what I've started to do here, this will be my yard for the wood yard. So I've started to apply the background wood piles. In front of those wood piles will be actual wood logs like this here. So this area will be covered with rows and rows of logs ready to be sawn. So I'll take you to this process. I'll set the camera up here, so I'll take you to this process. All right, I set the camera up. I might be in front of the camera for a little bit there. I'll just prepare the next strip. So what I'm doing now, you can't really see what I'm doing, but I'm applying the Mod Podge with the roll. And then I just try to match up here. Doesn't really matter, it's nothing critical. Something like this here. And then I take my roller, squeeze out all the air bubbles, all the extra Mod Podge. There. And for another one. Again, matching up. Now the photos are not exactly the same color. They don't exactly match 100%. But I like this photo because it looks even more distant, which is exactly what I wanted. I'm hoping you can see that on the camera. And like I said, this doesn't need to be perfect in any way because there will be rows of logs here. So this is just in case we see over the rows of logs or through the rows of logs. All right. And as you can see, my print, I'll try to switch the camera over a little bit. The way my print ends, it ends kind of sharp. So maybe I could add more trees here. I'll try to find something that matches. Maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, maybe. Okay. Okay. Can't go wrong with this, you know. It's nature. And trees can grow just about anywhere. So, there you go. So in this area right here, there's about 6 prints, one on top of the other. And it really doesn't show all that much. There. And like I said, once everything's in the foreground, this is probably all going to disappear. So there you have it. On to the next step. Okay folks, this is now day number 3 of the backdrop project, and now at this point the backdrop is all dry, and the only thing left to do is to apply a sealer coat on top of everything. And what I'm doing for the sealer coat is exactly what I've been doing for the gluing of the prints, which means I'm using my Mod Podge mat and my roller, and I'm just applying a nice thin coat on top of everything. That will seal the whole thing together, and it'll also bring out a little bit more of the color. It gives a little bit more vibrance to the colors. So again, I'll just leave the camera rolling, and I'll do the application. This doesn't need to be perfect. Just make sure that you have an even coat when you're done, no drips, and make sure that you overlay just a little bit above and beyond the prints. Like I said, once this is dry, it's not going to show, but it will seal everything in place, and it'll make everything more uniform. There, it's all done. Took about maybe 5 minutes to do. And it might look a little bit milky right now, but don't worry, that'll dry out totally clear, totally transparent with a nice flat finish. The one thing I like about the roller is that the fact that it's a roller, the finish is a bit rough, so there's even less glare if there was to be any glare. So that's a big advantage. The one thing that's the major advantage, the reason why I'm doing this is not just to hold everything in place, but this actually makes your paper print a washable print. Aha! Bet you never thought of that one, did you? Now you have a washable backdrop. So when you're doing scenery, if you're like me and you're a very messy worker, sometimes I just splatter paint on my backdrop or plaster or anything else. At least now it's washable. If it's just on paper and it's not sealed, game over. Your print is ruined. And since it's glued there, and it's probably glued there for 100 years, so that might be a problem. So I would not skip that step. I think that's a very important step. I've tried a couple of coats. Doesn't make any difference. One coat is enough. If it's an even coat, evenly applied coat, one coat is enough. So that about wraps it up for the backdrops. A few things to consider from the very short experiment that I've just had with you. I mean, you were a witness to my very first experiment here. One thing to consider is if you have a layout that's in a room where the sun comes in, if there's a lot of sunlight, it might not be a good idea to use paper print, because the ink in our printers are not UV protected. So if it's in direct sunlight, the print will probably fade away within, I don't know, maybe a few years. If it's protected from the sun, I mean, I have stuff that I've printed 20 years ago, which is in binders, and it's still just as nice as it was on the day I printed it. So I figure here downstairs, I don't have any windows, and I'm only here a few hours a week, so the lights are only on a few hours a week. So it's probably not going to affect the print quality. It's probably not going to fade, but that would be something to consider. Learning things that I've learned from this process is even if I numbered my prints, I still managed to put them on in reverse order. So that's one thing to watch out for. If I was to do this over again, maybe if I could do my backdrops without having the layout in place, I'd have better access to the entire wall. But then again, I mean, I've planned this layout ahead of time, and I've really done a lot of detailed planning. And once you start building the layout, sometimes things change. So if I would have done my backdrop way back when I had the layout planned but not built yet, my backdrop might have not ended exactly at the same spot. I mean, for example, this creek right here, which was not planned at all when I planned the layout, and it's here now, because once you have the track in place and you look at the scene, then you know, oh well, that might look nice if I add a creek here and a building here or something. But still, plan ahead and try to install your backdrop before you have any buildings in place, before you have any, especially mountains or scenery in place. Even the signals were, you know, they're a bit in the way. So there's a few places on my layout where I'll have to be very, very careful, because the signals will be close, and that's going to be one thing to watch out for. Otherwise, just, you can apply this to, like you've seen here, I've applied it to a wooded area. You can do the same with a cityscape. You can do the same with an urban scape. There's so many things that can be done with just paper prints and the way you can do a setup. So just have fun doing it, and let me know how it turns out. If you like the videos and you want to participate, everyone is welcome. You can send me a video of you in your workspace or in your leisure space saying the words "Hello" and "Welcome" to the Old-Scale Canadian National Railway's Sanmore Subdivision. You can email me that to the address below on my Gmail account, and I will make sure to have you featured as the opening act on one of my future episodes.